Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's a special year-end edition of the France 24 debate, in a year where we've seen a blowback against the elites, the blaming of immigrants, a big part in that Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump in the United States. Well, we're wondering if it's not machines you should blame. We're talking about it in the company of Denis Jacquet, who chairs the Observatory of the Uberized Economy. We're with Carol Ulmer of the think tank and lobbying group Confrontations Europe. Do you pronounce it the French way? Or the
Confrontation Europe, yes.
There you go. All right. Alistair Gould, member of the French Trade Union Confederation, the CGT, and Jakob Hassler, German biotech startup founder, who hangs his hat in Paris, who says Paris is a bad place to do business when you're German. A few years back, Americans wondered why the city of Detroit was bankrupt. Normalization of trade with China, the tech bubble followed by the financial crisis meant that manufacturing and jobs took a thumping. Yet the city was enjoying skyrocketing exports, good enough after the auto bailout to make Motown the fourth largest exporting city in the country. Between 2005 and 2011, Detroit's manufacturing jobs fell by 30%, while manufacturing production fell by only 16%. The difference between the two, writes The Atlantic, is the machines, and that was the big difference. Just before the break, Denis Jacquet, you heard Jakob Hassler say that the problem we have is we put too much of the onus on taxing labor when we should be taxing income. In other words, if we basically solve the tax code issues that make it that we have this huge income inequality that's growing, that all the rest will sort itself out, including the issue of automation and a labor market that's in upheaval?
It's certainly one good question. I don't know if it's only answer. It's very complicated. It's like the human body. At some point, you treat one leg because it's deficient, and suddenly you realize that there's something wrong elsewhere. Even when they worked on the DNA, when they were able to decode the DNA, they realized that there were 1,000 more questions once they discovered it, but before when they discovered it. So it's very complicated. And so I don't think there's one solution for this big problem. The thing is that the first thing we should do, and it's very difficult because there's a collective responsibility, but the interests are not aligned. So the problem is that when you discuss with China, with the US, with the whole Europe, Africa, where more than 50% of people are under 25 and unskilled, it's very complicated to find a common ground to hold these people. So, but the first thing is, okay, we have this general situation where most of the countries are under the debt. So there's something like 2,000 billion in France only. People are crushed by the debt. Suddenly we ask the financial system to be able to provide added value and profit just to fuel the debt of the different countries, and suddenly transform into high unemployment rates. So you have to stop this at some point. But how do you stop this? I don't know. So there's this movement in England that has been raised and run by Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, and she said, okay, now we will invest only in companies not that are making quarterly higher profits, but only if they have a sustainable development responsibility, only if they are able to provide something in terms of jobs, of human empowerment, of human elevation. And if they provide that, we will keep investing on them. The rest, we will dump them. So we have just to change this form of capitalism, which is not working anymore. That's the first step. And how do you start that? So it can only be an international stuff. We should do it between intellectuals, politicians, corporations, because at some point I thought at the beginning that the story of evolution was to provide more happiness and for people, and not to take them out of humanity and say we don't need you anymore. So at some point it will be a disaster. I don't know if it's in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, but if we want to make sure that we have a revolution all around the world, We just have to go on like that. Yeah.
Right.
You're talking about industrial revolution.
I mean, people upheaval. They will
Right,
say
so
no
political
more.
revolution,
Because
Brexit and
when you
Trump.
will be in the US, in France, saying, okay, I only have a job, we change every day. I have 3 jobs at the same time, and I get €8 per hour. At some point, people will say, no more.
Yeah, because
So,
there's 4.6% unemployment in the United States,
Yeah.
yet they elected Donald Trump.
Yeah, but why? Because when you,
But who elected
my big problem is when I
people
go to
unemployed?
TV shows and TV debates and everything, I've got economists in front of me, and the people say, okay, look, United States, England, 4.5 unemployment rate, that's great. Okay, but ask people what kind of job they get. So, and they are not happy about that. So at some point they will vote against all these people that created that. And that's what we underestimate a lot.
Yeah, but Donald Trump was not elected by the unemployed of
No.
Detroit or Milwaukee. That is sort of to say, yeah, now you can blame it on the unemployed who brought us Donald Trump is a very cynical way of looking at it, because the people who voted for Donald Trump were the small shop owners, the white lower middle class that still has, if you were a little bit ironic, that still has something to lose. And they voted for him because they feel that overall the world is turning against them and that they're not being paid attention to. I mean, and on all of these things, and that they are in a similar way to, you could say, I'm German in 1933, the lower middle class fears its degradation and it votes someone who promises them the bright future that they fear is gone and that they're not dominant anymore, neither culturally nor economically nor anything else. And, that's the driving force.
That could be the breakdown of capitalism, which Denis spoke about. That what we're witnessing is the breakdown of capitalism and people seeing that it's in everybody's interest.
Yeah,
All right,
but with Donald Trump, you have
Just, I want to get the opinion of the panel on something. Starting in the new year, Finland is testing out a pilot project. 550 euros a month will be given out tax-free to 2,000 citizens of Oulu. That's a town in the north of Finland. Some of the people getting the money will be blue-collar workers, others skilled engineers laid off by Nokia. France's leading candidate for president from the center-left, Manuel Valls, defends this idea of universal basic income. Some communities in other countries are already toying with it. Carol Ulmer, this idea that politicians don't really know how to deal with that cashier we were talking about at the beginning. So why not have this universal wage we can give to people, and maybe they'll find the way to do something with that money?
Well, this is a very highly debatable issue, I think. I think we should really follow what is going on in Finland and see how the experiment is working and what are the reaction of the different types of workers using this type of tool. I wouldn't say this is the perfect tool. I think there are very difficult issues behind that. I'm not sure the cashier will know what to do with this universal revenue by itself. I think training is still key for him, because if he only has a revenue but has to just take care of himself alone, I'm not sure this is the type of society we really want to have, at least in some part of
Well, then why
Europe.
is this idea taking off?
Because it's a good idea, fundamentally. A liberal, good idea. The question is how you implement it. But sorry, you were...
No, I think there is a part of the issue that is quite interesting indeed. But, well...
Somebody watching this cold, you get the impression going in that basically you've given up on trying to find a job for people and you're just throwing money at them.
Not necessarily. It depends on how you calculate this, right? I mean, there are two conceptions of the minimum sort of universal salary. There's one conception, which is the one that the Finnish are now experimenting, which is, you'd say, the more liberal economist type version, is you guarantee basically an existential minimum. You simplify the provision of social goods by saying you get that, and in exchange we actually simplify part of what our social system does. And then you have another one, which is a much more aggressive one, which in France, for example, some economists close to Jean-Luc Mélenchon are actually proposing, which is a much more higher universal wage attached to the idea that it also organizes you and gives you sort of a job that the state like in the GDR, you create a factory even if you don't need it, but you have people working and you pay them. And I think that the idea of just the money is not enough, which is why I like your idea, and I like the idea of experimenting. That is the most important thing in my view, is we should start trying out stuff and look how it works.
But there are other radical solutions that you can combine with this, in that the idea that we should not be aiming to work longer hours. I would say if someone is earning a big salary, why not make that a job share? Why not make that a policy of government, that people over a certain income have to job share? Why not encourage people to work 4 days a week? If we could just get used to this idea of finding radical solutions to the inequality that exists in society, then maybe we wouldn't have the fearful reaction that you talked about in terms of...
Let me ask you, Denis Jacquet, about that, because we often, when we have debate shows about France, people snicker at this concept of the 35-hour work week. They say, oh, French are lazy.
The thing is that on this question of what we call the universal, how do we call it? Income or something?
It's got different names. Universal minimum.
I'm split. My poor brain is split into two. First part of my brain say, okay, if we accept that, it means that we have lost the fight. So before
you're giving
organizing something, working on it, saying what's the future of the economy, of the job, of humanity, we said, okay, it's lost, so let's go to plan B, and plan B is universal income for everyone. So we'll tax the robots, the tax on robots will pay for this universal job. But for me, I'm a fighter because I have been in the French team of athleticism, so I don't like the idea of saying no and losing before trying. So we should try something, we should experiment. Of course, what is good in Finland is not necessarily the same thing in France or Germany because the culture, the structure, the organization is not the same. So I'm quite, sometimes we can experiment, we should experiment. And in France, we don't want to experiment. And that's the problem. The test and learn, we hate that. We should try something else and see if it works or not, because it will be too late to go back to something else. But on one side, it's funny because you've got ultra-liberal guys who says, okay, this universal income is a good idea, and far-left guy who are saying the same. But first time that they almost, methodology and the way to do it, but the idea, the concept is shared. So it's funny to see that.
But that's because there's self-realization. If we think that ultimately people work to gain money, and they also work because, my Protestant upbringing is because work means self-realization. And it's important to have meaning in your life. And the question is, can you, by giving people an elementary income, allow them to access, via education, to enter occupations, I will call it occupations, that allow them to get the self-realization part, even if the self-realization may not be connected immediately to what makes the most money. You could think about extensive logics of community service, you could be calling about sharing, you could be saying about sort of small local agriculture, look at local farming, look at the, with the arrival of technology, you can now do rooftop farming, you can start to grow your vegetables in your cellar, basically, with now LED lights that can do UV. So all of these opportunities, I think, yes, it's international, but it also has to become grassroots. And in order to become grassroots, you need to give people some leeway to try out. And if you don't have the leeway, you can't take the plunge. So, and I think in that sense, giving a universal income allows people to take the plunge, go and figure it out and try on the way to, sounds a bit phony, self-realization, but that's ultimately the part of work that we want to save. Let's all be honest, the fact that you put in cans into a shelf of a supermarket is in and of itself not the most rewarding task. Now, maybe you could do something else and be paid. Well, why wouldn't you want to try at least whether it works?
All right, Jakob Hassler, you're still making it about work. And here is the dichotomy. Humanity's attitude to work has varied wildly over the centuries, sometimes over the decades. Certainly the advent of factory work, as you mentioned, repetitive tasks done over and over, as illustrated by Charlie Chaplin in the film Modern Times, it hammers home the notion that labor as it is organized is an alienating experience. Almost a century earlier, in the German ideology, Karl Marx describes the communist society, the future. In it, he says, society regulates the general production, thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today, another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic. So this idea of a future where basically you don't have to work and now we're getting to that point where we may not have to work, and we're realizing that too is alienating. Having no work is an alienating experience.
I'd quite like to try that one. No, seriously, we need to get back to the issue of tax on capital.
But answer the question here about this, Alistair. A world where there would be no work, would that be a good thing?
Well, I'm saying that we shouldn't be aiming to work more hours, which comes back to a phrase you used earlier. I'm not going to say that the ideal would be no work. I think that's a little bit hypothetical.
But for many people, if we're talking about minimum salary here or a minimum universal income, that's what we're looking at.
Well, it's not necessarily wrong.
Carol Ulmer, your thoughts on this?
I think it's quite an illusion to think that people would want not to work their entire life. I think you're quite right by saying that by working, if you have the possibility to choose what type of occupation, it's not work, it's occupation, it's a different word, you can make during your day. I think it's quite self-fulfilling, and that you need something to do to realize yourself, to fulfill yourself, to unless otherwise your life is empty. You don't build anything. You don't. You have to have an occupation that build your days.
You say an occupation, but it's also, people like to bring home that paycheck at the end of the month. That too is a rewarding feeling, isn't it not?
Obviously, yes, of course, because they have the feeling that they have realized their tasks properly, and this feeling is quite important.
But with this minimum wage Finnish style, people will still have occupations that are paying, because you're not going to be able to live off 550 euros per month. Not in Finland. I've been there this summer. I guarantee you not, even if you don't drink. So I think it is a combination of things, but if you take away the pressure, you can allow for occupations that have very clear social objectives, for which today you don't have the money because your taxes are not enough, etc., etc., that actually become competitive in the labor market, and you could use them. I mean, look at the way we will have an incredibly aging population. Now, the heavy lifting of that will be done by robots, yes, but the human interaction and the fact that people want to interact in human communities, etc., that requires still humans. And I think the notion of how can people do something that is meaningful, I believe they are looking for what is meaningful. And I think we have to, and that's where I go for Denis, we have to think about what it means in a society to give people the opportunity to pursue meaningful occupation. And that leads to things that actually humans can still do better. There are parts of when humans are creative, when humans are combining things that you couldn't combine, that humans can do much better than a computer. And those we should focus on in terms of education, in terms of self-realization and work.
Denis Jacquet, what can humans do better than computers? And I'm not talking the ones with 6 PhDs and have gone to all the best schools, but people who don't have all those opportunities, who aren't born with all these opportunities to go to great schools and get the best contacts address book possible. What are some of the things that they can do that a computer can't?
In fact, almost nothing. That's the problem, because most of the time, these computers using of big data, artificial intelligence will bring a better diagnosis, for example, for medicines, for doctors. We think that there's a 7% mistake rate or error rate by humans and almost zero through an artificial intelligence system. So people would say, well, why should I die when I could be treated, diagnosed in time and well treated? So of course we won't be able to compete against computers. The question is saying, okay, because I am an entrepreneur, at some point if I have a better productivity because I use computers instead of people, it means that at the end of the day, the bottom line should be I've got more profit. So this profit should be reused to invest, and this investment should translate into jobs. That's how the capitalism and entrepreneurship was working until now. But what we see now is that we are so desperate because there are no more growth, no real growth, with jobs creating in a massive scale, that at some point we are taking our expenses and charges down, but with no jobs created. So we really have to rethink the whole process and say, what should we do? So it means that another way of saying it is that in my company, if I'm making more profit because I'm laying off people, making more money, what do I do with this money? So I cannot drink 100 cocktails every day. I cannot have 2 planes, 5 cars. What do I do with this money? So another way of putting, instead of universal income, would be to say maybe we should share this profit in a better way. One of the propositions that we will be making in January during the Assises de l'Ubérisation is saying, okay, could we transform these drivers into shareholders? Could we transform these delivery guys into shareholders of Deliveroo, Stuart, anything? Because at some point, if these companies are making more money and going IPOs or selling themselves,
yeah, but
then we will share this money.
You and I own stock in
Yeah.
companies, right? And
Yeah.
for your own personal income. And you know that when you're one little individual, you can't go to the shareholders meeting and have any influence.
Sure, but at some point, let's take the example of Uber. Let's say that Uber is really a 1 billion company, and they go on the Nasdaq next month, and it's 1 billion. And you're a driver, and you have 0.001%, but it's maybe 50,000 euros, maybe 100,000 euros. It's 5, 6, 7, or 10 years of your income. It's something that you can use to get trained, something you can use to start something, a business, a shop, a stores. We have to share this value that we are creating through reducing the number of people.
But there
that are
isn't the
working
political
for-
pressure right now for that.
No, but there should, and that's one of the questions we will be raising, yeah.
I think you definitely have a point here. We are talking about a change in capitalism, in the spirit of capitalism today. And we see, even in the US, emerging new types of cooperatives, companies that are owned by the employees. For instance, a new taxi app called Swift, I think, Uber-like apps, but that is owned by the taxi driver themselves. And so the company is keen on protecting better the employees, and the employees are possessing this firm. So you have new types of cooperatives emerging, allowing labor to be rewarded a larger chunk of this profit indeed. And the risk with the digital economy is having all those profits grabbed by a very small portion of people, and having a majority of losers and a minority of winners. And we don't want that. I think nobody wants this type of tech feudalism where you have new rich seniors that are exploiting a majority of people. So you have to think of new.
We will be all members of CIT.
I think
Yes,
it
please.
goes because I think it goes beyond. It goes beyond left and right and whatever. I think this is this type of digital economy issues.
Sharing the added value will be the point of this new economy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it means also a notion of investing you could expand, which now exists. It's called impact investing, so which goes even further than what your example of Lynn Forrester Rothschild goes, because what it says, so you have funds in France actually that already do that. So you have a first fund. It says I invest in regular companies provided they respect human and environment and human conditions. That's and it's led by Fanny Picard. And then you have a second type, which goes even further. It says, I invest for a social purpose under the condition of having a minimum return to my investors, and I accept the fact that by sharing the gains with actually the people for whom I provide the service. And you can think, for example, there's one example is, for example, over credit scoring. So there are cooperatives now, when people are over indebted, there's an interest of people not having over indebted, and banks don't want to lose credit. So they created a cooperative by which for the money the banks save, it goes back to the social impact you create, and you avoid over indebtment, over debt of individuals. And I think there are many, many entrepreneurial possibilities to create viable social enterprise. They may not create Uber-like market capitalization, but they don't need to. Yeah. And the fact and the question is where we need
give everyone a stake in the
future.
In the future of the economy is the key. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Alistair Gould, I'm so sorry.
Nope.
We're run out of time.
Debate.
Next time, and we've so much more to talk about. Denis Jacquet, I want to thank as well Jakob Hessler and as well Carol Ulmer. Thank you for joining us here for this special year-end edition of the France 24 debate.